I probably started a little bit too early. I had a bunch of stuff happen, and I kind of didn't realize where I was in the time. Um, but yeah, I mean, we're probably looking at a good 10-15 minutes until court actually comes back into session. That being said, would not be at all surprised if there's a little bit more fireworks before we continue with the trial. Um, I, over lunch, heard news from a few different people. Um, First off, a little bit more context to when they came back from the break at 11 o'clock, the disturbance in the hallway. It appears that Mr. No was hanging out with all the other journalists that were that are in the courtroom and basically supporting him. Somewhere in that whole group was what was going on involving them filming in the public area of the courthouse, um, as well as getting into a heated something or other discussion with a leftist activist that happened to be there and was in the middle of things in the hallway. Um, there may also be statements from the judge about, we found out that one of the journalists was also doing filming outside of what was allowed in the courtroom, as well, and that may well cause a rebuke, if not something more, from the judge when we go back on the record. Um, yeah, a lot of what I ended up dealing with over lunch hour was just getting caught up on all the messages. Like the day after I start moving stuff from Twitter, and get 30 notifications and a half dozen DMs on there because of what's happened this morning. So obviously I'm going to be keeping an eye on that. Um, so yeah, seeing what Melissa just posted a minute ago, uh, that's that is definitely not good. Um, that I mean, obviously the whole Russia Ukraine thing isn't good, but if they're starting to hit civilian targets in other countries, that is. I doubt that there's been anything about justification or like if they're trying to deflect. I'm just taking a quick look and see what I can see online here. Yeah, Polish government spokesman didn't confirm but said leaders are meeting in a crisis situation. Okay, so see another uh, person here. I don't know these organizations that they're with. Well, aside from University of Oxford, in with a doctorate in international relations, is suggesting that the missile was intended for Ukraine and it went off course into Poland, which, yeah, definitely a hell of a screw up, but Okay, so there's video of the damage. Russia's denying it. It I could definitely see this being a mistake, but obviously it's a deadly mistake, and maybe if we can't stop killing civilians, maybe we shouldn't have wars. I mean, that's just... Sorry, when I was in the military, we had whole training sessions on lawful versus unlawful targets, and unless the civilians are actively fighting you, they're not lawful targets. And I mean, obviously, I ended up being sorely mistaken in my belief that the U.S. would never do stuff like that, but to see it happen, and then in real time see other countries just saying, "Oh, we don't care. We'll target the civilians." That's why I don't like fighting. Yeah, exactly what I was kind of... I didn't explicitly say it, but yeah, that's exactly what I was going for there. Let me... Yeah, I haven't been going looking for the footage. The the text of the reports has been enough, and we've got independent journalists that, at least one that I know of from Portland here, that are actually out in the middle of all of that, and that's just like, geez, this is just insanity. So just kind of trying to catch myself back up with where I've been. Okay. Yeah, so we're talking about Andy. I mean, he's had, as far as I know, the same pinned tweet up there for months, if not longer. I always have to switch accounts to look at his profile. Yeah, honestly, I think that he's the main reason why Oregon banned the publishing of mugshots. So I did want to see if he's sharing any of the... Let me see. Where is... Yep, there's Hacker. Yeah, that's what I was actually looking, because I mean I can see him not tweeting about it, but um, one of his kind of subordinates, John Cho, who used to work for KOMO up in Seattle, he's here filming the trial and has been tweeting about it. So I would not have been surprised to see him retweeting some of that stuff. He's probably being smart to not do this, because anything that he retweets right now about the trial is definitely going to come up when the defense pulls him back in as a witness. Andy's always going for a documentary or book or something. I mean, he's got to do something to maintain relevance to be able to get money from his supporters. I'm trying to keep a closer eye on messages coming through our social media platforms really quick, because this is definitely a busy topic, one of the busier days for me. Okay, that's nice. We got the official court order from Judge Dahlin for the Yep. This kind of confirms. Hearing was held on November 15th. Discuss electronically recording the trial. Video recording must at all times comply with UTCR Uniform Trial Court Regulations 3.180. Trial may be live streamed, but all recordings limited to trial proceedings inside courtroom 15B, which is exactly what we're doing. The permission grant does not allow for any recordings to be made outside of the courtroom, which we have the allegations that happened during the break at 11 o'clock, and such recordings are specifically prohibited without further order of the court. Photographs and videos may only depict what is occurring in the well of the courtroom, not the public benches, which, like I said, I know of at least one video that was put out by another journalist earlier when Andy was on the stand, where there was video of the public benches, which is not ideal. Let's see, so I will say if you're still thinking back on that last post, if he does something about a documentary, while his civil trial is still going on, anything that he tries to put into that is definitely going to come up for, as evidence. And as we've seen, he is very good at deflecting any hint of an idea that he may have done something inappropriate. But, quite often what isn't said can be just as, if not more important than what is said. So. And for the record, this is not a milkshake, it's a smoothie. Just want to make that clear so that nobody feels threatened.
In the courtroom, the judge is on his way out.
Okay, judge is on his way, so we're going to be getting ready to start here. I'll go ahead and mute my mic and turn on the courtroom. Let's go.
All right.
Bear with me while I get logged on. All right. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't want to have to be addressing the media or any observers in the courtroom. Something came to my attention over the lunch hour that caused me some concern. I don't see Mr. Cho in the courtroom. Does anyone know? See it? See in the, oh, there he is.
He was still
So, Mr. Cho, I was just mentioning that I didn't want to have to address anything else with the media. That, you know, I trusted the media to be able to follow my directions and concerns, but what was your understanding of, one, who could record, and two, what they could record?
I was under the impression that one videographer could record, and I was tapped to be the pool, and that I could record on any type of tripod, as long as it's not pointed at any of the members sitting here in the audience, but primarily at the witness, the attorneys, and you, Your Honor.
So I became aware over the lunch hour that there was a tweet that you posted. It looks like it was at 10:04 a.m. And it just says trial underway. Mr. Andy Ngo is now on the stand talking about his alleged encounter with Rose City Antifa member John Cohen Hacker back in 2019, and went on a little bit longer. But there's also a video embedded in that tweet. And I think you were the only one sitting in that area. So it looks like you would have been the one that did the filming, which then you then tweeted what you filmed. And part of the filming, I can see the tripod. So you had your camera filming the whole area, including the tripod.
Yes, sir.
So the concern, I have two concerns about that. One is that should only have been one video recording, which was your recording that your live stream on your tripod, yet you had a second recording going on. And so even though it was one person, it was still two recordings. And the second concern is that it did show Mr. Ngo, but it also, you panned over and you could see everybody else in the courtroom. And so it seems like in both of those ways, that's in violation of the court's order. And I just want to make sure I'm not missing something. So why did you do that? One, why did you film with two different ways? And two, why did you pan over to show the back? And I realized you weren't just focusing on the back, but someone freezes the frame, they can see who's in the courtroom.
Well, Your Honor, first of all, my apologies for any misunderstanding. First of all, you're 100% right. I am unaware that only one recording device could be used to film these proceedings. With that said, and again, now that I think about it in hindsight, I did ask specifically if we could live tweet. And my understanding of simply taking a 30-second clip rather, Your Honor, was quote unquote live tweeting, which is why that shot was not, focused on any witness or any attorneys, but it was almost like setting the scene. It was innocent. It was not meant to show anything. It did not have opinion. And frankly, at this point, if you need me to take anything down, I can do that right away. And I'm at the mercy of the court.
So when I have followed people that live tweeted before, they're actually typing things saying, here's what's going on, as opposed to saying, oh, here's a video, what's going on. I think live tweeting, when you're typing things, is significantly different than just sharing video. I mean, I don't see any meaningful difference between streaming something and saying, oh, I just recorded this and immediately tweeted it, other than there could be a short delay. And it's also, this was a 34-second clip.
Right.
And the issue, the issue about the two cameras, I mean, it's the idea is under the court rules that there's to be you can have one still photographer, and we had one still photographer in here earlier, and we have another person who's going to be doing the still photographer this afternoon, and one video, and whether it's live streaming or recording for later publication or later broadcast, it's still just one video. And so the mere fact that you brought out you're videoing twice at the same time is definitely concerning to me, because it just seems, I mean, there's under no circumstance would that be compliant with the court's order.
Your Honor, I just beg your forgiveness because this is my first time in your courtroom. Number two, again, clearly there was a misinterpretation of, again, and the definition of what quote-unquote live tweeting is. I consider myself a video journalist, so the way I tell stories is primarily through video. So again, I believe technically I did record, and in no way do I explain with any disrespect in your interpretation of live tweeting. But the video that was, stand still, again, followed all your protocols. It's just that at that moment, my understanding of live tweeting, again, because I'm a video storyteller, was to simply capture a brief 30-second moment and just put it out there for the public to show what's happening.
I understand that. But that doesn't address the issue about there can only be one recording. I mean, and you were doing recording, and as a video journalist, you would know that a recording on the iPhone, even if you just share, even if it's a short clip, is still a recording. And I literally can see on the recording that you have the other recording going. So this recording shows that there were two recordings happening simultaneously.
Your Honor, that's what goes to show you there was no malicious intent, and the fact that I'm not even defending myself, I did not even think twice about that as being problematic. An iPhone recording another iPhone for 30 seconds. So again, at this point, I really don't have a defense. I'm just trying to explain my rationale at that moment. And again, I'll follow whatever guidance you recommend.
All right. So the trial, it sounds like the trial is, at least the state's case in chief, is close to being over. So you may continue you can come back over here, you can put your iPhone on the tripod. It has to be in a position where it is nothing at all on this side of counsel table. So not showing anybody in the background, even court deputies, audience members, not audience members, members of the public, etc. And so, frankly, it should be in a position where you have it set up and you don't really need to move it around much, if at all. And in terms of if you're going to be live tweeting, if you're a video journalist, I want to be 100% clear, which I think was clear before, but obviously you didn't get this, that you cannot use another phone, and no one else in the courtroom can use another phone to video record this. Understand that?
Crystal clear, sir.
All right. So, Ms. Burgess, your next witness.
Your Honor, the state is going to call Officer Johnson. Let me just pop out and grab him.
And before the officer is sworn in, Mr. Cho, I was just looking at that initial tweet, but as I scroll down just in that same thread, I see that there are other recordings, and I can't tell if these are things that you cut from the stream or not, but it appears that there was during the defense opening statement, the angle was showing other people in the courtroom. So I think what you'll need to do is move your camera to a spot where you're not getting anybody in the background, even the deputies. So it may be that you need to move your camera to the edge of the jury box so you're angled this way, but I can see, at least in one of the other videos, I can see a couple other people present in the back. So
Again, my apologies. It'll be pointed in this direction the whole time moving forward.
okay, so even for closing arguments?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, I'm sorry, you may swear the witness in.
Please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You may be seated. Please state and spell your name for the record.
It's Edward Johnson, Edward Johnson.
Morning, good afternoon, Officer Johnson. How are you?
Okay.
How are you currently employed?
City of Portland. I work patrol in the Hollywood district. I've been there for 17 years.
And are you still in the Hollywood district?
Yes.
Were you working in the Hollywood district on May 7th of 2019?
Yes.
Did you respond to 4224 Northeast Halsey Street? It's a 24-hour fitness.
Yes.
Is that in Multnomah County?
Yes.
When you arrived to the 24-hour fitness, what were you called there for?
Basically, there was a report that an assault had happened at like 3:33.
And who did you speak with when you got there?
I spoke to Andy Ngo.
And did Mr. No show you his phone case at that time?
I don't recall on that one.
Let me give you, if I give you did you make your report?
Yeah, got a report.
Do you mind just taking a look at your report? If you take a look at that, will that refresh your recollection so that you'd be able to answer that question?
Yes.
Okay, so page 4 of 11, I believe, if you can just look at the third paragraph up from the bottom.
Okay.
So just look up at me when you're done and I'll ask the question again.
Oh, I'm done.
Okay. So when you arrived, did Mr. No show you his phone case?
Yes.
And had it been damaged?
Yes.
And did you take photographs of that?
That I don't recall.
Let me just have you look at that same paragraph again, and then look up at me and I'll ask the question again.
Okay.
So, had the phone case been damaged?
Yes.
Do you remember what the damage was?
It's by the power cord inlet.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked as States Exhibits 1, 2, and 3. So this is States Exhibit 1. Does this look familiar to you?
Been a while.
Does that look like the Black Otterbox phone case described in your report?
It is the Black Otter Box case. And so if it's coming from my phone, then I took it.
And this is States Exhibit 2. Can you tell me what part of the phone that is?
That's the inlet for the power cord.
And this is States Exhibit 3. Is that the same part of the phone?
Yes.
Thank you. So you spoke with Mr. No when you responded. Did you speak with anyone else?
I spoke to manager Jane Wallace.
And did Mr. Wallace kind of talk to you about what had happened?
He gave me a brief synopsis of what he saw.
And so were you trying to ascertain the name of anybody that had been involved in that?
Yes, the actual other person that was involved.
And did Mr. No, was he able to give you a description of him?
He gave me some information about the other person, yes.
And did Mr. Wallace give you the name of that person?
No, he referred me over to security.
And did you end up speaking with Lisa Lochner about that?
I emailed her and she sent me back information.
Did she give you the name of the person who'd been involved in the altercation?
Yes.
And what was that name?
James. John Hacker. Sorry.
Thank you. And did Mr. No show you or provide you a video recording that he had taken during the incident?
Yes, but that was like the next day.
Okay. And you entered that into evidence?
Well, I burnt it onto, yes, I put it on a disc and then I put it in evidence.
Okay. And were you able to confirm that the man in the video was John Hacker?
That was later.
Okay. Do you want to? You can talk to me through how that you did that, if that's helpful.
Mr. No kept contacting me and giving me information.
Okay.
from that information. I eventually got to Mr. Hacker's address.
Okay.
Went there and met him at his house. Briefly spoke to him, saw his ID.
Okay. I don't have any other questions for this witness.
Okay, one more. Cross-examination.
Hi, officer.
Hey.
Your report includes statements that Mr. Hacker made.
Repeat?
Your police report includes information about statements that Mr. Hacker made.
Are you saying made?
Yeah.
Okay. You're gonna have to explain that further.
Okay. In your report, you describe some of the things that Mr. Hacker said when he interacted with Mr. No.
Okay, are you saying it's from him or from other people?
From Mr. Hacker.
I didn't speak to Mr. Hacker until the end.
Mr. No told you about some of the things that Mr. Hacker said.
Yes.
Okay. Statements about being upset with
I'm going to
Mr.
object,
No's.
Your Honor. This is hearsay.
So he's not asking about the actual statement right now. I mean, he's not actually,
Well, he's describing what they're about. That's
so why don't you let him ask the question, and then you can make your objection after he asks the full question.
Mr. No told you that Mr. Hacker made statements about incidents that had happened previous to this encounter on May 7th, 2019.
Yes.
so, Your Honor, I'm going to make the same objection. He's asking him about hearsay statements. There's no hearsay exception that he's identified.
Your Honor,
What is the hearsay statement that he just offered?
He said Mr. No told you about, and then proceeded to describe a bunch of things to Officer Johnson that Mr. No had allegedly said. Mr. No is not a party opponent. They cannot elicit that hearsay through Officer Johnson.
Your Honor, we're not offering this for the truth of the matter asserted. We're offering this to prove that statements were made when Mr. No gave testimony that they weren't.
Okay. So objections overruled because they're not offering this for the truth of the matter asserted, so I cannot consider them for the truth.
Totally understand that. If I could just get a little clarification on why they're offering them for the purposes of just what evidence we may adduce on rebuttal, that would be helpful. I didn't fully understand that explanation.
Your Honor, I don't know that I need to disclose defense strategy. I mean, I just said that these are being elicited to prove that the statements were actually made, not the truth of what's being contained in the statements themselves.
Okay. So you may,
Sorry, may I just be heard one more time?
My understanding is all that matters is that Mr. No said something. It doesn't matter what was said, because if it matters what was said, that goes to the truth of the matter. And the defense is expressly saying they're not offering this for the truth of the matter asserted. So by definition, it would not be hearsay.
Okay, this feels like improper impeachment. This seems like something that if they were going to impeach Mr. No with, they should have done when he was on the stand. I understand you've made your ruling. I just want to point out to the court that this feels like it's not the appropriate way to impeach, and he's just trying to elicit testimony through Officer Johnson that is.
Okay. Well, if they're offering testimony about what was contained in the police report, and Mr. No didn't author the police report, could he have asked could he have been asked about that?
Yeah, my understanding of the way that impeachment works is that when Mr. No was on the stand, he could have just read him from the police report, but they chose not to do that.
Okay. All right. So the objection's overruled, and it's noted.
Understood. Just to clarify, Mr. No told you about statements that Mr. Hacker had made him about their interactions prior to May 7th, 2019.
Yes.
And about being upset about those.
Well, I'd have to look at the report. I don't.
Okay, you're welcome to take a look at page 9.
Okay, my report probably is not the same as yours. So which one are you referring to?
Oh, that's quite possible. Can you turn to page 7 of 11 in your report?
Okay, and then which date are you looking at on the top?
Yeah. 5/15/2019 is where it begins on that page.
Okay.
So just go ahead and give that a read through. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me actually direct you to 4 and 5. My apologies. The numbering's a little different.
Okay, I'm not sure exactly what you're looking for.
That's okay. Well, I can ask the question again. So, Andy Ngo expressed to you that these two had interacted before,
Yes.
and he also expressed to you, as contained in your report, that Mr. Ngo told you Mr. Hacker was making statements about their previous interactions.
Your Honor, at this point, it doesn't seem like the witness's recollection is able to be refreshed by this.
I can ask a more direct
Or
question.
just having him read the report, and it doesn't seem like he's able to answer the question.
Well, he refreshed his memory earlier in your response to your questions by reading the report. So, I mean, it's up to the witness. If the witness says it doesn't refresh his memory, it doesn't. But if reading the report does refresh his memory, then he can testify as to that.
Were you able to refresh your recollection by reading the report? Let me ask you a more direct question. Did Mr. Ngo express to you his belief that Mr. Hacker was upset about his reporting?
Your Honor, I'm going to object again. This is improper hearsay evidence. It's not how impeachment works. Rule 613 and explains how a witness should be impeached, and this should have been done when Mr. Ngo was on the stand.
So is the objection hearsay?
It's both. They're eliciting hearsay and it's improper impeachment.
So I think he's getting close to the line of something that's hearsay, but not quite there. And even if it's not offered for the truth of the matter, if it goes much further, I don't know how it would be relevant in terms of the statements, but you can answer the narrow question now, and if you don't remember it, you can ask Mr. Scissors to repeat the question.
Okay, he's going to have to repeat the question.
Okay, no problem. I'll ask it again. Did Mr. Ngo express to you that Mr. Hacker told him he was upset?
Let him
Sorry.
finish the question before you make the objection.
Did Mr. Ngo express to you that Mr. Hacker was upset about Mr. Ngo's reporting?
So before he answers, Your Honor, now he's just trying to elicit his own client's statements out of this.
So that objection is sustained.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Did Andy Ngo send you any videos?
Yes.
Okay. And did you have an opportunity to observe those videos?
Yes.
And did one of these videos include something regarding Mr. Ponte?
Yes.
And when was that video sent?
Gotta look at the report for the exact date. Looks like it's on May 15th, 2019.
Okay. And you stated that you observed that video, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Ngo indicated to you that the video was sent to him just after he tweeted out the video.
Your Honor, I'm going to object again. This is just still hearsay. I'm not sure what we're doing. It's also outside the scope of the direct. It's also not relevant to what we're talking about.
This is relevant, Your Honor, as with our earlier arguments. This again goes to, Mr. Ngo testified that he didn't send anyone out to video or anything else, Mr. Hacker. He also testified that it's possible that his reporting, his tweeting, can make targets of people. This goes to that. This goes to Mr. Hacker's credibility and his intent in the ultimate moment about not wanting to be recorded. This is proof. This is proof in proofs in the pudding kind of evidence about Mr. Hacker's intent of not wanting to be recorded.
What difference does it make about what Mr. Ngo sent to Mr. Ponte or Mr. Ponte sent to Mr. Ngo about Mr. Hacker's state of mind?
Well, it demonstrates, Your Honor, that because of Mr. Ngo's activities, the kinds of activities that, we'll argue Mr. Hacker was concerned about, his reporting, his enormous followership, his ability to make targets of people, he was in fact targeted. He didn't direct Mr. Ponte to do it, but someone came and did record Mr. Hacker.
When?
We believe the evidence will deduce that it happened anywhere from immediately after to 1 week after Mr. Ngo posted the video of the gym incident.
So how would that have any bearing on Mr. Hacker's intent on the day of the incident?
Well, it certainly goes to demonstrate the context here, right? His whole concern, one of our key arguments is that his intent had to do with not wanting to be recorded by this person. And there's also, a circumstance, an environment where this sort of thing is happening all the time. This is a piece of evidence that goes to that. It explains these circumstances. It explains the context. His intent, you can't understand it without this context.
So I don't know that anything after the incident date can go towards Mr. Hacker's intent as of the date of the incident, or his state of mind as the date of the incident.
Yeah.
I mean, but let's say Mr. Ngo had never sent a single video or a single text prior to the incident, but Mr. Hacker, for whatever reason, thought that Mr. Ngo knew lots of people and would talk to them on the phone or have conference calls with them, but nothing about video, nothing about texting, nothing about tweeting. And then afterwards, Mr. Ngo, for the very first time in his life, sent a text or sent a tweet or posted something on some social media website. That wouldn't show that Mr. Hacker had. It wouldn't explain Mr. Hacker's state of mind on the day of the incident. So what's relevant and what's pertinent is what Mr. Hacker knew before the incident and at the time of the incident, not what happened afterwards. So
Understood, Your Honor.
So I don't think that there's I don't know how that would be relevant.
I do think the relevance goes to the reasonableness of his concerns, his sincerity in being concerned about being recorded.
All right, I don't see how there's any, even applying the low level standard at a 401 analysis, I don't know how that could be relevant. And if it was relevant, then I have to apply a 403 balancing. I would say, well, it's essentially a waste of time, or it's confusing the issues, etc. So under either 401 or 403, I would keep that out.
Understood. Thank you, Your Honor. Officer, did you receive any evidence of injuries to Mr. Ngo?
I don't think I took any pictures of Mr. Ngo.
Okay. So you didn't receive any evidence of any injuries to Mr. Ngo?
You take a look at the report to see, but
Go ahead.
the initial. Okay, so he said he didn't have any marks.
Okay. Nothing further.
Redirect.
Just briefly, Your Honor. Officer Johnson, did Mr. Ngo give you a pain rating?
Yes.
What was his pain? Oh, I'm so sorry. I asked if Mr. Ngo gave him a pain rating.
Okay.
What did he rate his pain at the time?
As a 1 on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the worst.
And I don't have any further questions, Your Honor.
All right, and may this witness step down and be excused from his subpoena.
He may from the state, Your Honor.
Yeah, nothing further from the defense.
All right, you're released. Thank you. Any additional witnesses for the state?
Nope. State with rest, Your Honor.
Mr. Scissors?
Your Honor, this time we will move for a judgment of acquittal. We'll have our staff file that right away, and I'll provide the court as well as Mr. Burgess with a courtesy copy. Just a moment. If I may approach.
I will say my general approach with respect to motions for judgment of acquittal in criminal cases and motions for directed verdict in civil cases is that if there's a written motion, I guess by rule, the opposing party would have an opportunity to respond to that in writing. I don't know if that necessarily makes a lot of sense in a trial to postpone trial so there can be a written response. What I would often do is say, well, I'll take this essentially as an outline of the oral argument that's going to be made, or treat it as an oral argument. But Ms. Burgess, considering they've provided a written motion that you just received now and I just received now, do you want an opportunity to respond in writing, or you be able to respond orally?
I think I'll be able to respond orally, but it depends. If defense is going to make their motion orally and walk us through this, then I may not need some time. But if I need to rely solely on this, then I need some time to read it.
And Your Honor, just for everyone's benefit, I can make these representations orally, and we don't need to submit the written filing.
Okay. It's up to you to decide how you want to do it.
I'm happy to simply proceed orally, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead.
Your Honor, as the court is well aware, the legal standard for a motion for judgment of acquittal is whether the state's evidence adduced thus far could substantiate a criminal charge, and or whether each and every element has been satisfied. We would put it to the court that there has not been evidence adduced sufficient to prove that Mr. Hacker had the requisite criminal intent. The robbery statute, as this court knows, incorporates theft. The case law is unequivocal that theft requires an intent to permanently deprive someone of their property. At bottom, Your Honor, there simply is no intent in that regard, and this simply is not a robbery. Mr. Ngo himself testified that Mr. Hacker was irate and angry, and there is an utter paucity of evidence about any suggestions that Mr. Hacker needed a phone, wanted a phone, or demanded a phone before he was recorded. Really, the only credible evidence points to a single conclusion, which is that he simply did not want to be recorded. The case law is abundantly clear that a temporary deprivation and intentional and even illegal taking is not sufficient. You need an intent to permanently deprive. We put it to the court that the state has not met that burden, and this court should respectfully grant the motion for judgment of acquittal on those grounds.
Ms. Burgess?
The standard for MJOA is not whether we've proven it beyond a reasonable doubt, but that the court must view the evidence in the light most favorable to the state. And in determining whether the evidence supports a verdict against Mr. Hacker, the court should resolve all evidentiary conflicts in the state's favor and give the state the benefit of all inferences that can be drawn properly. That's from State v. Langley. So the court in this situation needs to view all of the evidence in light most favorable to the state. Defense is asking you to speculate or make an assumption that the only evidence we have of Mr. Hacker's intent is a statement that he did not want to be recorded, which I assume they are pulling from the video. There are other statements in that, including that he would break his fucking phone. There's also been plenty of testimony about Mr. Hacker not only knocking the phone down, but then proceeding to take the phone, not just take the phone and stop the recording, but take the phone and leave. Mr. Hacker did not give the phone back willingly. He had to be challenged by staff and threatened to have his membership revoked before he gave it back. I think that there is a lot of evidence on the record to allow the court, viewing the evidence in the light most favorable to the state, to find that Mr. Hacker either intended to commit theft or at the very least attempted to commit theft, which is the standard that the court needs to meet for robbery. I think the defense is asking you to read into the record a lot of evidence that has not been put on yet, and to read their theory of the case into your MJOA decision, which is not the appropriate standard. I can talk through each of the elements if that's helpful to the court.
Mr. Scissors, you argued that Mr. Hacker didn't need a phone, but one can be guilty of theft simply by depriving somebody of an object, even if they don't want to keep it. So someone could, for example, stealing a phone. You can take a phone, throw it into the ocean. That's theft. They don't keep it, but they're depriving the other person of the property. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, Your Honor. And to that point directly, the defense would argue that even at this stage, the proof is in the pudding. And to correct the state, one of the state's witnesses did testify that he gave the phone willingly. And that came from the witness, mind you, who actually retrieved the phone. That was his testimony. Why I say the proof is in the pudding. He didn't smash the phone. He didn't throw the phone off the balcony. He didn't sprint out of the place. And he's doing all of this in public view. Point being, had he wanted to do any of those things, he clearly didn't have a problem doing any of the other stuff that's been alleged. Why wouldn't he smash it? Why wouldn't he have stomped on the phone? It's because he didn't actually have an intent to do so. And I think the evidence adduced, even at this stage, is very clear on that point.
All right. So based on the standard that I have to apply at the judgment of acquittal stage, I'm denying the motion for judgment of acquittal because I have to take all the inferences in the light most favorable to the state. And in doing so, I find that it would not be proper to grant the motion. So,
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Scissors, will the defense be putting on a case?
We will.
Okay. Who is your first witness?
We will call Mr. Hacker to the stand.
All right. So, Mr. Hacker, before you take the stand, so you understand that you have a right to remain silent, meaning that you don't have to testify in this case. And if you don't testify, I can't take any, and I can't and won't take any inferences about your guilt based on the fact you didn't testify. The burden is on the state and the state alone to prove your guilt. You don't have any obligation to prove anything. Do you understand that?
I understand that.
But you also have an absolute constitutional right to testify in your defense and put on evidence in support of your case. And if you want to do that, that's your absolute right to do that. So have you had a chance to talk to your lawyer about whether you want to testify or not?
I have.
Okay. And are you satisfied with the advice you've received?
I am.
And after talking with your lawyer and then just having this brief colloquy with me now, do you want to testify in your own defense?
I do.
And I should have mentioned one other thing. So because you have the right to remain silent, the state can't call you as a witness. They can't comment on the fact that you didn't testify. But if you testified, you obviously can say what you want to say and present your side of the case. But the state has the ability to cross-examine you, and you can't, because you've taken the stand, say, I'm not going to answer that. I raised the fifth. You understand that?
Yes.
And you still want to testify? Okay, you can take the stand.
Please raise your right hand. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
You may be seated. Please state and spell your name for the record.
My name is John Hacker, spelled Johnhacker.
Hey, Mr. Hacker.
Hello.
How you feeling?
Good.
Let's just get right to it. Did you ever, at any point, intend to permanently deprive Mr. Ngo of his phone?
I did not.
Did you ever, at any point, intend to actually destroy Mr. Ngo's phone?
I did not.
Okay. Do you mind giving us a little bit of background on your education?
Yeah, I got an associate's degree out of PCC in the addictions counseling program. And I worked as an addictions counselor for a handful of years. Stepped away from that field to go back to school. I got a bachelor's degree in public health, took a small break, and then finished with a master's degree in criminology and criminal justice.
And what got you interested in criminology and criminal justice?
I would say, I mean, I've been like politically minded for a long time, but the degree in public health, I learned a lot about racial disparities when it comes to mental health, in the incarceration rates, you know, health in general, just the whole gamut of things. And as a youth, I had gotten in trouble and knew about how unfair personal experience and then witnessing how unfair the criminal justice system can be. So that's why I got into the master's program.
Okay. And you mentioned you're politically active. What do you do in the political arena?
So I became active right after Trump was elected in 2016, and I first started by getting involved in some activist groups early on, and then I mostly started, and I've been a photographer for a long time, so I started doing photography and videography at protest events, demonstrations primarily, and I've really kind of settled into that role of a citizen journalist or independent media covering political events.
Okay. Being as you're in this journalistic advocacy sort of capacity, have you encountered different political groups on the ground?
Yes.
Okay. Like what kinds?
Well, I would say pretty early on, I started going and doing video and photography work when there would be far right groups that would protest, and then there'd be counter protests from left wing groups. So a lot of covering very high tense, a lot of conflicts in the streets between the left and the right.
Okay. And are you familiar with Antifa?
I am.
What's your relationship, or how would you describe your relationship to Antifa?
I would say, well, Antifa is like a hard thing to define, and means different things to different people. So I guess first, like, Antifa is like a very loose collection or movement of people that counter fascist or far right in more confrontational or militant ways. So sometimes that's like physical confrontation, sometimes that's exposing who they are and their bigoted views. So I exchange information with pretty much anybody that does, research on the far right. I sometimes will give information, sometimes I will receive information. And at protest, I interact with just about anybody that's out at the protest.
Okay. Have you had any negative experiences as a result of your advocacy or reporting on the ground?
Can you ask the question one more time?
Yeah, that's okay. Have you had any negative experiences as a result of your reporting or advocacy?
Yeah. So early on, I'm pretty vocal about my political leanings, and so early on, I was able to interact with the far right in different ways, which quickly shifted. So it got very quickly. It got to the point where anytime I was around, them knowing who I was and my political leanings, I would, generally be harassed and heckled, but sometimes threatened, and I've been chased out of events before, physically pushed out of like Proud Boy events and such. And then I've had harassing phone calls, death threats through social media. I've had on multiple occasions had people show up to my house in like full black masks. So I've had, yes, lots of my daughter's phone has been called many times, things like that.
And how, let me ask you this. I mean, have some of these activities been going on for years, or is this just in the past couple of days? What kind of time frame are we talking about?
Definitely on the ground stuff was happening in 2016, 2017, 2018. And I would say it was around 2018, 2019 that I started, experiencing more of the like direct message threats or phone calls. I don't recall the date of the very first time somebody showed up at my house, but it's definitely escalated more recently. And actually, in fact, I just yesterday I got a call from the FBI around some online threats against me And that's happened twice where the FBI called me about threats against me.
Okay. So what has been the impact of this kind of, as you're describing it, unwanted attention, either online or on the ground? What's been the impact on you?
Generalized anxiety everywhere I go. I'm, because of my burns and my size, I'm very visible. I've gotten a lot of media attention, and most Proud Boy groups and neo-Nazi groups locally at least know who I am. So I'm always looking over my shoulder. I went from somebody that was opposed to being armed to needing to have, arm myself at my house, constantly on edge about who's outside of my house. It's affected, I wouldn't say it's affected my relationship, but it's definitely affected my family in the sense that they have a lot of fear around things. And then more directly on the ground reporting, I can't really report if there's a right-wing protest. I can't really go to a right-wing protest anymore and interview people or video them or photograph them, because I will be immediately at least pushed out of their event, if not assaulted.
So would you be concerned, for example, if someone posted personal information about you online?
Yes, which happens many, many times. I can't count how many times it's happened.
Did you know, let me ask you this. Did you know of Mr. Ngo before May 7th, 2019?
I did.
How did you know of him?
I first became aware of his work when he was a part of organizing this free thinkers group. And they brought in a lot of very controversial speakers. And I attended a couple of those. And then shortly after that, he did some articles around hate hoaxes where he had claimed that people that were victims of anti-gay violence in Portland were actually faking it. Some of the articles that he did with a couple white nationalists, and he would call them conservatives. So I became aware of kind of his strong bias and right-leaning coverage.
And
Sure.
what was
I apologize for interrupting. I understand the foundation that Defense is attempting to lay. I think we're getting a pretty wide view here. I think if there's something specific that they're looking for that's related to this May 7th incident, maybe we could hone in on that, but just giving a general overview of Mr. Hacker's impression of Mr. Ngo is not relevant to.
Well, I will say that any general impression about Mr. Ngo, whether it's a positive or negative impression, just in general about political leanings, it's not relevant.
I understand. I'm just asking
if it's an issue, if it's something that would give concern about safety, or something that was particular to this incident, that's going to be more relevant.
Just asking, maybe we could focus it in.
Were you aware of Mr. Ngo's online presence at around the time of May 7th, 2019?
Yes.
And were you aware of, how many Twitter followers he had, for example?
Yeah, not exactly, but it was somewhere between 100 and 200,000 followers at that time.
Okay. What was the impression that his reporting kind of left on you around that time?
Prior to May 1st, it was more just this guy is either at worst dishonest, at best misrepresented a lot of things, and was a right-wing pundit or journalist, just
Okay.
like most other.
Did your impression of him, you mentioned May 1st, did your impression of him change, and if so, how?
I think it changed before that, but May 1st was very memorable because of what happened on May 1st.
Can you describe some of the incidents that happened on May 1st?
Well, like was already mentioned, May 1st is generally referred to as May Day. It's International Workers' Day, and it's somewhat of a protest or activist holiday. A lot of events will happen, and there was 3 different events that day, left-leaning protests that day. Earlier in the day was one that I actually was involved in getting speakers for, which is like an anti-ICE protest where there was a rally and then a march to ICE. Then there was another kind of festival one where there was tabling and such. And then at night there was an after party at a bar, which ended up turning into a brawl or a riot.
Okay. And was, to the best of your knowledge, was Mr. Ngo present at these protests?
He was present at all three.
And I take it you were there as well?
Yeah, I think the festival one I might have just stopped in at.
And describe how your impression of Mr., because you mentioned this earlier, describe how your impression of Mr. Ngo changed around that time or based on those events?
Well, the big one, which is largely what led up to our argument at the gym, which was the evening protest. A bunch of, well, all the protest right-wingers showed up to, let's say that, but at the nighttime one, a bunch of them showed up and they were actually captured on video planning to commit violence on the left-wing protesters that were at the bar, and Andy was with them while they planned this. And there was a friend of mine that there was a couple in the group that were Nazis, and one of them actually had hit my friend over the head with a baton and knocked her out. And the coverage by Andy was and Andy ended up like smearing her as the bad guy, even though she was the one that was assaulted by the Nazi.
Your Honor, this is improper hearsay.
All right, this all goes to Mr. Hacker's impression of Mr. Ngo. This is just before the 24-hour incident.
Could we clarify what hearsay exception Mr. Hacker's impression is under?
Well, and I'm not even really sure what statement is being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. It's just his impression of it's what Mr. Hacker's impression of Mr. Ngo's reporting was. It's that he felt it was inaccurate or dangerous or whatever. It's not the truth of the matter asserted.
Well, to the extent there's a hearsay objection, that's overruled because the defense is saying they're not offering this for the truth, meaning it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if these statements are true or not. It doesn't matter if Mr. Ngo did or did not say any of these things or do any of these things. What matters is that, I guess, the statements were uttered and that caused Mr. Hacker to feel a particular way.
I understand that. I think that there's a way for them to adduce that without adducing actual statements because those are improper hearsay.
And I will say, just in terms of relevance, getting into specific statements or even much detail or great detail about any of this really doesn't make that much difference. I mean, it's just kind of a general proposition of Mr. Hacker said he was concerned about Mr. Ngo and Mr. Ngo's associates, and that caused him to be anxious. So I think that's, it seems like that's been established. I don't know if we need to spend more time on that.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention?
All right, so there's a fire drill, but not on this floor. So let's wait for the announcements to finish.
Plus the emergency strobe light and siren activated in your area. An all clear announcement will be made at the completion of the drill. Thank you.
So they're doing a fire drill just on 3 floors. We had our fire drill on this segment of the building a while ago. I'm actually surprised that we could hear the announcement here. I would have thought it would have just been limited to those floors, but if we hear any other bells and whistles, just know that it's a drill unless
May
something
I
else
have
happens.
your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? A fire drill is about to take place on other floors within the building. Please do not evacuate from your floor unless the emergency strobe light and siren activate in your area. An all clear announcement will be made at the completion of the drill. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Scissors, you may continue.
Okay. Let's talk about May 7th, 2019. And just to be clear, the May Day events you're talking about, is this the same year?
Yes,
Okay, so this is about a week later at the 24-hour fitness.
correct.
Okay. Where were you when you first saw Mr. No?
That day.
Yeah, on May 7th in the gym.
I don't recall exactly. I've been seeing Andy at the gym for many, many months. So, I do know for a fact I saw him when he was going down the stairs.
Okay. Just walk us through what happened next.
When I saw him, because of the events that had happened the week before, I was very resentful and irritated with Andy. So I made the impulsive decision to grab a bottle by the water fountain and, the stairs, there's an overlook over the stairs. So I was standing where he's like below me, and I decided to impulsively pour some water, and then immediately set the water down and walked into the gym.
Okay. What happened next?
He came back upstairs. It looked like he was looking for the person that did it, and so then I decided to, instead of doing this like hiding what I did, it was a bad decision. I walked over to him and I confronted him about the lies that he made about May 1st.
Oh, and what sort of things were you saying to him?
It was two things. Was why did you say that? Because I was the person that picked the speakers at the earlier rally.
I'm sorry, what to the speakers?
The speakers at the May Day rally, the earlier.
So what did you say before you said the speakers?
I believe you said he was the one that picked them.
Pick the speakers, okay.
Yeah. And Andy had tweeted about how the speakers had called for violence on Border Patrol, which never happened. So one of the things I said is, why did you lie and say that speakers were calling for violence on Border Patrol? The other being, why are you protecting the Nazi that, knocked out Heather pretty much?
Okay.
So those are the two things that I was confronting him about.
And did you make any reference with regard to the woman who was knocked out? Did you make any reference to her injuries?
I'm pretty sure I did, yeah.
I mean, what do you recall what you said? Anything about her back or her neck or her head or the?
It was
assault
either, that she was knocked out with a baton, or she was knocked out with a baton and had her vertebrae broken. One of those two.
Okay. So you weren't threatening to break
No.
Andy's vertebrae? Okay. Were there staff around?
Yeah, he denied that he lied about things. We kind of went back and forth a little bit, and then within a couple minutes, I thought two of the staff, but at least one of the staff came up to us and was like, "What's going on? Is everything okay?"
Okay. What happened next?
I don't recall if I continued to try to argue with him after that, but I do know that I walked away from the situation frustrated, and went upstairs to continue my workout. So the third floor is the cardio. So I went to go finish doing cardio. And as I was getting ready to do that, I was still irritated and frustrated. So then I had gone back downstairs, and Andy and the two staff were standing by the stairs. So they had moved a little ways. And I just remember turning to the staff, somewhat emotionally, and being like, this guy shouldn't even have a membership here. He protects fascists. He, sticks up for them, protects them, rolls with them.
So you were feeling emotional. Any other emotions going through your head at that point?
Yes.
Like what?
Just irritated with the whole, just his coverage, his dishonesty.
Okay. So what happened next?
Then he pulled out his phone to film, and I immediately slapped his phone, and it fell out of his hand.
What was going through your mind? You said immediately. What was going through your mind when he pulled his phone out?
It was just like, I do not want this guy filming me.
Okay. And what happened next?
He picked his phone back up and continued to try to film, and then that's when I grabbed the phone out of his hand.
And what was first? Did this happen quickly? Were there big gaps in time?
This is all in seconds.
And again, when you took the phone, what's going through your mind at that point?
It's just not wanting him to film me. It's about the only thing.
Okay. Did you sit there for a long time and think about taking his phone?
Your Honor, we're leading a little bit here.
Okay. So if you can ask open-ended questions instead of leading.
Certainly. What was going through your mind before, during, and after when you took the phone?
Before he pulled out his phone, it was more just feeling and thinking about how people that work with and protect Nazis shouldn't be able to, you know, have gym membership there. I know it was irrational at the time, but that's what I was thinking. And then during, it was when he was pulling out his phone, it was I don't want to be filmed. And then after grabbing his phone, I don't know if I had much thought about what I was doing. It was just that I didn't want him to film me.
Okay. Yeah. Why didn't you want to be filmed?
I saw, especially over the last year, but definitely the previous months, that he had named a lot of people, including these subjects of the hate crime hoax. And he would name them and put their photos out, and then they would get harassed. It happened with the CARE organization. It happened with a lot of different people where they would get named, photos would get put up by Andy, and then they would get death threats or just general harassment.
And Your Honor, I understand that you are the trier of fact here, so that you can parse out what should and shouldn't be heard. I'm a little concerned about the trier of fact hearing all of this because this is still hearsay. There's no foundation for any of this. If he's claiming that people receive death threats, that's hearsay. I just am asking whether we strike that or not, that we make it really clear what he is allowed to say and not.
Your Honor, again, I mean, it's the same basic argument. I don't really think there are any clear statements that we're trying to offer for the proof, for the truth of the matter asserted. It's about his impression and actions that are happening that color and inform his impression, and his reasons for not wanting to be recorded. I mean, that is an essential element of this crime. He's got to be able to defend that. He's got to be able to explain the context for his thinking.
So are you offering these?
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? The fire drill is over and we are all clear.
So are you trying to prove that any of these statements or any of these beliefs are actually true?
This is kind of the point, that it doesn't really matter if the statements are true. That's not where we're offering this. It's his subjective belief or impression about these actions, these consequences. And in a way, you know, it's your Honor's prerogative to determine whether they're believable or reasonable, or whether that even matters. Why we're offering it is not for the truth of the matter asserted contained in these statements. I'm not even sure which statements, but just that these facts and circumstances and events were happening, and they had an impression on him, and that impression informed our client's intention. Because really, the key in this case is, what's his intention for taking the phone?
Okay, so like by prior rulings, because this is not offered for the truth, it's not hearsay by definition. The fact that Mr. Hacker has heard that other people got death threats doesn't mean that there actually were death threats. In fact, that's not something that needs to be proven in this case, that there were death threats or there weren't death threats, but it goes to the mere fact that he thought it was true, even though it doesn't matter if it's true, it could be false. That would explain his actions. So it's because it's not offered for the truth, it's not hearsay, therefore the hearsay objections overruled.
Thank you. Mr. Hacker, you also stated in that brief moment that you were going to break his fucking phone. Did you have an intention to break his phone?
No, I didn't.
And what was going through your head when you said that?
I was just irritated at that time.
What happened next?
I started to walk down the stairs, in which James Wallace had said, sir, don't do this. I think he said it twice, maybe 3 times. And he was following down the stairs, and I stopped halfway down the stairs and turned to him and gave him the phone.
And can you describe your, without going into what Mr. Wallace actually said to you, can you just describe the nature of that interaction and how the phone was given back?
Well, me and James always had a good relationship, and he handled that situation very well. So when he said, don't do this, give me the phone, it wasn't really, it was actually gave me an out. Like, I don't want this phone anyway. I just didn't want him to film me, so I gave it to him.
Okay. And did Mr. Ngo, to the best of your knowledge, recover his phone?
Yes.
And did you have an opportunity to observe any postings from Mr. Ngo immediately after that event?
Yes.
Did he post anything about this event?
Yeah, he did post the video that he was able to capture, and said this person robbed and assaulted me at the gym. And
Okay. Did he post any other information?
not that I can recall that day. Not that I can recall.
Okay. And did you receive any sort of unwanted attention from any of those
Yeah.
postings?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This is now out of the scope of what we're talking about here.
Mr. Scissors?
Your Honor, again, it goes to the reasonableness of his concerns. It goes to his credibility and whether, I would say, both witnesses' credibility in a sense, in that, Mr. Ngo provided testimony that it was possible, but he was somewhat equivocal about whether he had any awareness that his postings could make targets of people. Mr. Hacker is giving testimony about his good faith belief that if he was recorded, it could turn into some unintended and unwanted consequences. And this is potentially evidence to support that and to basically, it goes to his credibility.
Yeah, like I ruled earlier, what happens after the incident, it's not relevant even if it is.
Understood.
It would be excluded under Rule 403. I think had Mr. Ngo not posted anything, I suspect if the state had come in and argued, look, there's nothing to fear. He didn't post anything. He could have posted this. He had this video. Still has it now. Didn't post it. That shows that he's a good faith actor. The defense would be objecting to that and say, well, it doesn't matter what happened afterwards. What matters is what was known at the time. And so I think what would apply in that case also has to apply in this case.
Understood. Thanks, Your Honor. Just one moment, if we could. All right, Mr. Hacker, preceding this event, I'm talking about events that happened afterward, and I'm talking about 24-Hour Fitness, May 17th, 2019. Had you ever been doxxed or had any other sort of personal information posted online about you?
Don't think so.
Okay.
But not that I recall. Generally, the harassment was either online or out at protest. I do not recall me being doxxed prior to that.
Okay. Did you have concerns regarding becoming a target because of Mr. Ngo?
Your Honor, we're leading again. He's just testifying for his client.
So if you can rephrase the question.
What were some of your concerns? You did testify earlier about having concerns about wanting to be recorded. What were your concerns about being recorded by Mr. Ngo, and why?
And Your Honor, I'm just gonna he actually said that he just didn't want to be filmed. All he was thinking was he just didn't want to be filmed. He didn't say he had concerns.
I don't really see the distinction, but
Overruled.
Concerns were doxing, harassment.
how does hearing and seeing a video of your interaction with Mr. No make you feel?
It's pretty embarrassing.
Is that how you normally behave?
No.
Why do you think you behaved that way on this day?
I think that his coverage that day was more personal because he was smearing a friend of mine and he was making claims that were actually pretty dangerous around an event that I was a part of organizing.
Okay.
More personal.
So just some concluding questions here, Mr. Hacker. Did you ever, at any point, have an intention to take Mr. No's phone without ever giving it back?
No.
Did you ever make any attempts or have any intent to smash his phone?
No.
Or stomp on it?
No.
Did you rob Mr. No?
No.
Yeah, I'm
further.
just going to ask that we strike that last question. That's a legal conclusion he's asking the witness to make.
Sustained.
Nothing further.
The last answer is stricken. So cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. So you talked a little bit with Mr. Scissors about Antifa and how they are about exposing people and exposing their bigoted views. And so are you associated with them or you work with them?
Again, it's a loose collection of people, so them is very subjective
Okay.
way to refer to it.
And I apologize, I don't know a lot, so
It's hard to
bear
know.
with me. So you said you will give them information and you'll receive information. What does that mean?
Usually, what I'm referring to is if there's a big protest and say like a Proud Boy beats somebody up, it's somebody being like, hey, that person's name is this, or I've seen him at this event before, things like that.
So
Generally.
like you would use the information you share to identify people?
Yeah.
Do you post that publicly or is that just kind of internal?
Usually, yeah.
So like on your Twitter?
Correct.
Okay. Is that kind of like what you described Andy doing?
Yes, very similar.
Okay, so you guys kind of do the same thing, just on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Correct.
And you talked with Mr. Scissors about that you've been threatened. Why do you think you were threatened?
What, I mean, are you talking about a specific threat, like a time frame, or
Well,
just
so-
in general?
When Mr. No, you were here when Mr. No was testifying, and he talked about that he'd been threatened, and Mr. Scissors asked him if it was because of his work, the things he says and does, that he was threatened. And so I guess that would kind of be the same question, right? Like, is it your journalism that brings those threats?
Yes, but I've had many threats where they literally name Andy as the reason why. They're like, this is what you get for messing with Andy, or this is, stuff like that. So sometimes it's very clear it has to do with my interactions with Andy
Is that before this incident?
after.
Okay, so that's not really what we're talking about. But it sounds like from what you've described that you actually have a very similar experience to Mr. No, right? You described being really scared and really worried and kind of walking around looking over your shoulder because people are always after you. And is that how you felt at the gym that day?
At the gym, I generally always feel like I have to look over my shoulder, if that's what you're asking.
So why would you then decide to dump water on another person?
It was an impulsive decision that I wish I didn't do.
Okay, but you did instigate all of this.
Yes.
And you said when you were talking to Mr. Scissors that the protest, the May Day protest, and actually just quickly on that, just so we're clear, we're talking about Heather Clark, right?
Correct.
Who was injured?
Mhm.
Ian Kramer was convicted of that, right? And not Andy Ngo.
Correct.
Okay. But so the protest, you said the protest was what led up to the argument at the gym. But that wasn't actually what led up to the argument. What led up to the argument was you pouring water on Mr. Ngo.
Yes.
And then you said you walked away, and then when you saw him come up, you decided instead of not engaging that you were going to go back and engage him.
While I was up continuing my workout, I was obsessing in my mind about how irritated I was, so I went back with intention to pretty much say what I said to the staff, which is this guy should have a membership here because of his actions.
Okay, yeah, because I think you testified that you came upstairs, he came upstairs, and you decided to walk over to him and confront him about the lies that he made on May 1st, right? So you didn't wait until the staff was there. You went over and confronted him about what you considered his lies.
Yeah, so to clarify, there's two sets of stairs. He came up the stairs when I argued with him in the very first place. Then I separated and went up a second set of stairs to the third floor, and then I ended up coming back down.
Okay, so twice you walked away and then decided to come back because you were really mad.
I walked away once and came back. I walked away twice total, but came back once.
Okay.
Since
Yeah. And so and just so I'm clear, Mr. Scissors asked you when he pulled his phone out. You said you immediately slapped it out of his hand, right?
yes,
And you said you did that because you didn't want him filming you, and that was what was in your head.
correct.
And that you said you knew it was irrational.
I wasn't really referring to that as irrational. I was referring to my statements around saying that he shouldn't have a membership.
Okay,
at the gym.
so yeah, so you're saying that the thoughts that were in your head when you slapped the phone out of his hand were that you didn't want him filming you, and that people who protect Nazis shouldn't be allowed to have gym memberships.
Yeah,
Okay. But it was just that you didn't want to be filmed, and you said you didn't have much thought about what you were doing. You just didn't want him to film you.
I didn't have much thought about what I was doing as I was walking off with his phone.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about, talked with Mr. Scissors about like why you were so scared about this, right? Do you have Twitter?
Yes,
What's your handle?
John the Lefty.
Do you post people's pictures?
I do.
Do you post their names?
Yes.
Do you post criticisms of them?
Yes.
Is the goal of that to kind of publicly out them as we talked about at the beginning?
Yes.
Why would you do that if you think that that's something you're scared of happening to you?
I only do it to people that are violent and that have extremely fringe right-wing views.
Do you consider what you did to Mr. Ngo violent?
No,
Okay.
it definitely borders.
So it's okay for you to out people, but you don't want it being done to you.
Correct.
Okay. And you're a journalist, right?
I identify as a citizen journalist or independent media. I don't work for anybody.
Right. Sorry, I wrote citizen journalist down and I forgot it, but that's a good phrase. And you've been going to protest since 2016.
Correct.
So when you recorded the protests?
Record?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are those recordings and videos, are those your work product?
Yes.
And so if you were to lose that work product, that would be a big loss for you.
Yes.
And you've actually filed lawsuits over your cell phone being taken.
No.
No?
No.
Are you currently involved in any lawsuits?
Against me?
You're not suing anyone?
I feel like I want to say no, but
I absolutely. So I was looking at a complaint that was filed, it's a plaintiff's complaint filed in federal court, and it may be closed, I'm not sure.
against the federal law enforcement.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so you are involved in a lawsuit where your phone was taken.
Yes.
Okay, and is it correct that in that complaint, you allege that as a result of defendant's unlawful seizure and failure to return Mr. Hacker's cell phone, that's your phone, that he lost work product and was prevented from exercising his First Amendment right to report on the misconduct of law enforcement?
Correct.
Okay, so you would agree that taking someone's phone, specifically someone who's a journalist and records things and that's their work product, that's a big deal.
Yes.
And you'd agree that when you were standing there, you slapped the phone out of Mr. No's hand, and then you didn't stop. You at that point took the phone and you left.
Yes. No, I didn't leave. I walked away from the direct vicinity.
Right, and so I think you talked to Mr. Scissors a little bit about kind of the order of operations and how you were walking and on the stairs. Mr. Wallace said, "Sir, don't do this," but we watched the video a couple times. What actually happens is they ask you repeatedly to stop, and what we see on the video is that you're still walking down the stairs after they ask you to do that, right? I don't have any further questions, Your Honor.
One moment. All right, redirect.
Just a moment, Your Honor. Mr. Hager, can you just describe, you've seen the video, you've seen where it ends. Can you kind of describe when and where you gave the phone back in relation to when the video ends?
Yeah, so the area where the staff, Andy and me, were all at when I came back downstairs from the cardio area is the stairwell that comes down, the elevator, and also the stairwell that goes to the first floor. So it's where all the stairs intersect in the elevator. When you go down to the bottom floor, the stairwell elbows. So it kind of goes around, and we were like right in the middle where the elbow is.
Okay. Nothing further.
All right, you may step down. One moment, please. All right, Mr. Scissors, any additional witnesses?
None from the defense.
Okay, any rebuttal case?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Do you need any time before we go to closing arguments?
We're gonna just have a quick bathroom break. I think I'd appreciate that. Just stand up for a second.
I would second that motion.
All right, let's take, when we take 10 minutes. So back here at 2:55.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, guess bit of a break, closing arguments. We'll probably actually get a verdict today. This definitely is going way faster than was anticipated. So yeah, I will go ahead and put the hold music on, and we'll be back soon.
argument.
Your Honor, I'm gonna just ask to put a slide during the first close, if that's okay. Thank you, Your Honor. The slide I have up is the sole count that we're looking at, and it goes through the elements that the state needs to prove. And based on the evidence that we've heard today, both from the witnesses and the evidence that we've seen, all of these elements have been met. To establish that Mr. Hacker is guilty of robbery in the third degree, we need to prove the act occurred on or about May 7th, 2019. That's not in dispute. We need to prove that Mr. Hacker committed or attempted to commit theft, that in the course of committing or attempting to commit the theft, he used or threatened the use of immediate physical force on Andy Ngo, and that Mr. Hacker acted with the intent of preventing or overcoming resistance to his taking of Andy Ngo's property or retention of the property immediately after the taking. And it's a lot going on, but it's just very simple. We have to prove that Mr. Hacker committed or attempted to commit theft by taking Mr. Ngo's property by using force, and that he intended to keep that property. We don't have to prove he intended to keep it forever. We don't have to prove that he did in fact destroy it. What we have to prove is that he tried. And the evidence that you've heard today shows that these elements are easily met. You heard from the gym staff who heard yelling. You heard that they heard Mr. Hacker calling Mr. Ngo a fascist. You've heard a lot of testimony about how angry Mr. Hacker was. There was some inference from defense that this all stemmed from some tweets or something prior to this, but really what this stemmed from was Mr. Hacker making, as he described it, the impulsive decision to pour water on Mr. Ngo and start this confrontation. And then to continue confronting him repeatedly, despite staff being there, because in Mr. Hacker's mind, Mr. Ngo shouldn't be allowed to have a gym membership, shouldn't be allowed to do the journalistic things that he does, despite Mr. Hacker himself doing those same things. So he was angry. He was angry in this moment. And you can look at that for his intent. You can use your common sense. You can use your inferences to determine his state of mind. He started this confrontation, and when he noticed Mr. Ngo filming, he slapped the phone out of his hand because, as he said repeatedly, he didn't want to be filmed. He actually explained that he didn't want to be filmed because he didn't want to be doxxed. He didn't want his information out publicly, despite acknowledging that he does that to other people. So he slapped the phone out of his hand. Stopped the filming. And when Mr. Ngo retrieved his phone, that wasn't good enough for Mr. Hacker, so he took it. And you heard testimony from Mr. Wallace and from Ms. Barkley, and you've seen the video. And the video supports what all of the witnesses have testified to. It shows on the video that force is used. You've seen that the phone case was damaged. You've heard that he slapped it out of his hand. Mr. Hacker himself admits to using physical force. There doesn't have to be an injury. We don't have to prove an injury. We just have to prove that Mr. Hacker used physical force in the act of committing or attempting to commit theft. And that's what Mr. Hacker did. He took the phone, and he didn't just keep it. He didn't stay there. He didn't slap it out of his hand again. He took it. He took it and he left. He had to be challenged by gym staff. We all watched the video multiple times. They said, "Sir, please stop. Give the phone back. Give the phone back." This is after he's taken it out of Mr. Ngo's hands again. And you can see on the video that not only does he not give it back when they ask him to, he continues to leave the scene. He leaves. He takes the phone. And that's the element of preventing or overcoming resistance to his taking of the property or retention of the property immediately after the taking. He's depriving Mr. Ngo of his property. We don't have to prove that he meant to keep it forever. All we have to show is that he took the property, and you heard from him in his own words that he just wasn't thinking. He's embarrassed by this decision, but he didn't stand there and give it back. When he went down with James Walls, he didn't say, you know what, I'm embarrassed. Can you please give this phone back to Mr. No? He didn't give it back willingly. He was forced to return the property that he took. Defense is going to stand up and argue that we haven't proven his intent because Mr. Hacker took the stand and said, I didn't intend to rob him. I didn't intend to keep it forever. And he has every motivation to say that. But what you can look at is all of the evidence that you heard that shows his intent. Shows his intent to attempt to commit a theft. His intent to deprive Mr. No of his property. When Your Honor considers all of the evidence, the outcome is clear that all of these elements are met. Mr. Hacker was angry. He didn't want to be filmed, so he took Mr. No's phone, and the taking of that phone was robbery in the third degree. So we ask that you find Mr. Hacker guilty. Thank you.
For one moment. All right, Mr. Scissors.
Thank you, Your Honor. This court might disagree with Mr. Hacker's behavior, but fundamentally, this is not a robbery. Mr. Hacker is not on trial for misbehaving. He's not on trial for harassing. He's not on trial for criminal mischief. He is on trial for felony robbery in the third degree. This case is about not wanting to be recorded. This case is about being angry. This case is about Twitter. This case is about being impulsive. This case is not about Mr. Hacker's intent to rob Mr. No. And I want to be very clear. The case law is unequivocal to a statement the state made that we don't have to prove an intent to permanently deprive. State v. Sorrow from 2021. The intent for theft refers to an interference with property that is either permanent or so extensive as to deprive the property owner of the major portion of the economic value of the property. State v. Kelly. The intent is to effect a permanent transfer of the property or a major portion of its economic value, or to dispose of the property such that the owner's recovery is unlikely. There needs to be some evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Hacker had the requisite criminal intent. The case law is abundantly clear. The bottom line here, Your Honor, is that if the conclusion is that Mr. Hacker merely wanted to stop a recording, that's a not guilty. If the conclusion is that Mr. Hacker was merely acting impulsively, that's a not guilty. If the conclusion is that he wanted to maybe even legally temporarily deprive Mr. No of his property without evidence beyond reasonable doubt that in doing so, he effected what was tantamount to a permanent transfer of the property, whether through the economic value or destroying the property, that's not guilty. And most importantly, Your Honor, if there is any reasonable doubt in this court's mind about Mr. Hacker's intent in that regard, that cuts in favor of Mr. Hacker, and that's a not guilty. So, let's talk about what really matters, and let's talk about what doesn't matter. What matters in this case is Mr. Hacker's intent. Why Mr. Hacker wanted to stop the recording. Why Mr. Hacker took the phone. What doesn't matter is whether he acted appropriately. What doesn't matter is if this court believes his motivations were reasonable. What matters is what his subjective criminal intent was, and whether there was one, and whether there is any reasonable doubt about what that intent was. Your Honor, not every illegal taking is a robbery. Let's take an example of a teacher and a student. Student's texting in class. Teacher says, "Look, Timmy, I'm going to break that damn phone if you don't stop texting." Timmy keeps texting. Teacher smacks it out of his hands, grabs it, says, "Phone's mine now, Timmy." Puts it in her desk. Doesn't give it back to him until the end of the day. Did she temporarily deprive Timmy of his phone? Did she make a statement about keeping the phone? Are these to be believed? Is there a reasonable doubt about whether she actually intended to rob him, actually intended to permanently deprive him of his property, even if there was some incidental damage to the phone when she smacked that out of his hands? It's clearly not a robbery. Let's talk about the core facts in this case that aren't really in dispute. Mr. Hacker is acutely aware of Mr. No. Mr. No, unlike Mr. Hacker, currently has 1 million Twitter followers. His impact is undeniably greater than most of the people in his sphere. Mr. Hacker was upset about things he said. He confronted him at a gym. He made a statement about not wanting to be recorded right before saying, "I'll break your fucking phone." It all happened in a couple of seconds. He gave credible evidence, credible testimony that he was acting impulsively. He wasn't even sure what he was doing. He also testified to a lot of things that he probably shouldn't have done. He came across as extremely candid and credible. Why would this court have any reason to doubt that he was acting impulsively, angry? He was willing to admit.
Your Honor, I apologize for interrupting. I'm just going to ask that we stop referring to Mr. Hacker's testimony as credible. I think that's improper vouching.
Ultimately, it's up to the trier of fact to determine who's credible. I think it's not necessarily helpful to an argument to say this person's credible or not. I don't think it applies the same way in a bench trial as it does in a jury trial, but I guess just in terms of developing habits for the future, making like explicit claims about credibility in closing argument is probably not helpful. You can refer to the facts and you can let the jury or the fact finder make their conclusions about that.
No problem, Your Honor. Thank you. Mr. Hacker readily admitted to taking actions that someone might deem inappropriate. He gave testimony that he acted impulsively. And what actually happened in those moments? It all happened in a few seconds. There's people all around. This isn't some back alley mugging. People all around. He takes the phone. He walks away. One of the state's own witnesses testified that he gave him the phone willingly, apparently after he'd calmed down. The phone was dispossessed from Mr. No for a grand total of about 15 seconds. The phone itself was fully recovered. There was minor damage that was hard to even see on the phone case. A phone case, I might add, that is quite literally designed to sustain falls from handheld height. It's an OtterBox. These are the facts. And let's talk about the context and the actions that speak to Mr. Hacker's intent, and whether any of these give rise to a reasonable doubt about whether he actually intended to destroy or permanently deprive, which basically means to keep or otherwise ensure that Mr. Ngo would never recover the phone. There's no evidence whatsoever adduced that he actually needed or desired a phone or a phone case. That one I think we can basically set aside. The state's own witnesses testified that he was irate, that he was angry. That sounds a whole hell of a lot like Mr. Hacker's testimony about being impulsive. Impulsivity, being too angry to think, that is not a criminal intent to permanently deprive. Why might Mr. Hacker have had reason to not want to be recorded? Mr. Ngo had a Twitter following of hundreds of thousands of people. Mr. Hacker, it was his impression that people who were posted about by Mr. Ngo were targeted. The state's argument that he engaged in some of the same behavior, first of all, it's a matter of scale. And secondly, if the state's best argument is that his intent in that moment wasn't reasonable, it doesn't have to be. The question is whether he had an intent to not want to be recorded. The question is whether this court finds evidence that there is some reasonable doubt about why he actually took the phone. Further, the proof is in the pudding. I've said that phrase a few times. If Mr. Hacker wanted to destroy this phone, why didn't he stomp on it? Why didn't he throw it off the second story? Why didn't he throw it against the wall? He didn't. The phone was recovered, and the phone itself was fully functional after only about 15 seconds. That sounds like a temporary dispossession. That sounds like what the case law suggests does not qualify as a criminal intent for theft, for robbery. One of the state's arguments, again, might be his statement about wanting to break the fucking phone. Oregon courts in different contexts have expressly distinguished verbal statements that are to be taken literally as threats versus those that are the sort of impotent expressions of frustration and hyperbole that the court should not take literally. And it also cuts both ways. I mean, he makes two statements. He says, I don't want to be recorded, and I'll break the fucking phone. Is it that he doesn't want to be recorded, or does he literally mean he wants to smash the phone? Your Honor, I put it to you that if he had wanted to smash the phone, he would have. There's no denying that he did all these other things. He did these things in public view. He wasn't concerned about what others were watching him doing. Why would he have been concerned about stomping on the phone if that was actually his motivation? It's because it wasn't. Your Honor, in the state's discretion, they have charged robbery in the third degree. Not harassment, not criminal mischief, over 2 years after this incident occurred. Here they have charged felony robbery in the third degree, and so that is what must be proved. Did Mr. Hacker act admirably? No. and he admitted as such. But Your Honor, that's not why we're here. This doesn't look like a robbery. This doesn't smell like a robbery. This doesn't feel like a robbery. That's because this is not a robbery. Your Honor, we would ask the court to find Mr. Hacker not guilty. Not guilty because the evidence does not support, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Mr. Hacker had the requisite criminal intent to permanently deprive Mr. Ngo of his phone or destroy it. Not guilty because there's a reasonable doubt about what Mr. Hacker actually wanted to do with the phone or the phone case. And not guilty because this is simply not a robbery.
All right, rebuttal closing argument?
Yes, sir. Your Honor, throughout this trial and that closing, there's been a lot of noise. A lot of talk about Twitter, about Cider Riot, about Antifa, things that defense is asking you to pay attention to read into Mr. Hacker's mindset. That doesn't matter. What matters here are the facts of the case that we have before us. You are the finder of fact and the finder of law, and what we need from you is to look at the facts and determine if they happened and if they apply to the law in this case. And I ask that you ignore all of the noise that is not relevant to the very contained incident on May 7th of 2019. You heard from Mr. Hacker and Mr. Ngo that they're both journalists, and defense makes a big point of Mr. Hacker being concerned that Mr. Ngo has so many followers. They both use their videos to create income. And I'm going to ask that as we go through this, you keep in mind that not only is the phone property, but the video itself is property of Mr. Ngo. That's also property that Mr. Hacker was attempting to deprive him of. Mr. Hacker knows that. He talked about that on the stand. He's well aware that that video is also something. That's how he tweets and gets his followers and his money. That's also what Mr. Ngo does. And that's also what Mr. Hacker's intent was to deprive Mr. Ngo of when he took the phone. I'm going to touch very briefly on State versus Sorrow and distinguish that case from this. In that case, there was a man who was mentally ill who wanted to rob a bank. And he specifically did that to get police's attention to get help. That is very different from what we are looking at here. The court viewed that as a temporary deprivation because the bank robber in that case took the money and then sat down in the lobby of the bank and waited for police to arrive. That is a temporary deprivation that the court is looking at in State versus Sorrow. Defense disagrees that I have to.
What about State v. Kelly, which is the other case that was cited by the defense in their brief? And I understand that.
I haven't had time to read that to be able to address that with the court. If you'd like me to submit something or take a break, I can.
I will look at that after closing argument.
Defense also gave you the situation of a teacher and a student and compared this to that. And I just want to be really clear that there are some very stark differences in those situations and this situation that make what he described with a teacher and a student slightly different and more tolerable than this, because in that situation, the teacher is an authority figure. And in that situation, and most importantly, Mr. Scissors described the teacher willingly giving the phone back to the student. And that did not happen here. If you look at the theft language, and Ms. Berry, I apologize, I'm going to ask again to connect to the screen. This is in the definition of theft, and this is what defense is hitting on. It's that we need to show either that Mr. Hacker wanted to appropriate the property of another to himself, which is what he did, And it says, for so extended a period of time or under such circumstances as to acquire major portion of the economic value or to dispose of the property for the benefit of oneself. That's one way you can find it. The other way is just for him to deprive another of property, to withhold it, or to dispose of it in a manner or under such circumstances as to render it unlikely that an owner will recover such property. And again, I want to be really clear with the court that if we're looking at this, those are the theft definitions. We don't have to prove that he successfully committed a theft. We have to prove that he attempted. That's a substantial step. Your Honor is well familiar with that jury instruction. Not only did he take the phone, he left the scene. That is a substantial step. He took the phone, he took the video, and he left. Defense continues to argue that Mr. Hacker willingly gave the phone back, and that's not the facts that are in evidence. There are no facts and evidence that he said, you know what, I've changed my mind, here you go. You hear on the video that he is being challenged, that there are multiple people asking him to give it back, and he doesn't. He leaves. Defense is asking you to read all of the noise of Twitter, of Mr. No's followers, into Mr. Hacker's intent. All that shows is that Mr. Hacker knew the value of Mr. No filming him. Your Honor, we don't have to show that Mr. Hacker permanently deprived. We just have to show that he attempted. And he did. That is what the facts of this case show. Very clearly, Mr. Hacker is trying to claim that he was scared. But in reality, this all started because he was angry. He confronted Mr. No. And he himself told you. He just took the phone. He wasn't thinking. He took the phone and he left. And so defense is asking you to say, well, that's not enough to show beyond a reasonable doubt because there's nothing there. You can't possibly get there with nothing if he says there was nothing in my mind, I just didn't want to be filmed, and that's not correct. Because as you are well aware, there's a jury instruction about inferences and common sense. And defense is asking you to speculate that what he really wanted to do was give it back, and he really wanted to just briefly, temporarily stop it, and somehow that by walking away, taking the phone, and leaving, all he was trying to do was stop the filming, when in reality, he just left. He didn't give the phone back. We're not asking you to speculate. We're not entitled to your speculation here, but we are entitled to your common sense. You can infer the intent of Mr. Hacker or of any actor by the natural consequences of their actions. And in this case, he left the scene with Mr. No's phone. And you can infer from that that he intended to keep it, at least he was attempting. Those meet the elements, Your Honor. That attempt by Mr. Hacker to deprive Mr. No of his property, that you can infer beyond a reasonable doubt, not only from the testimony that you heard from these witnesses in person, but from the video that you have seen, the video that is in evidence if you'd like to watch it again, that those elements have been met. And we ask that you return a verdict of guilty in robbery in the third degree.
Can you go back to this slide about theft?
Yep. These are the definitions of theft. It's one of the jury instructions. We can email it to the court if you'd like.
So, I pulled up the State v. Kelly case that's cited on page 2 of the defense memo, and Kelly just refers to, among other things, it refers to the definition of theft language. I'm not doing a word-by-word comparison, but it seems that it has the same language back in 1977 as it does today. about what it means to appropriate property of another. That's either to permanently deprive or to deprive for so extended a period of time that effectively the product's useless to the person. So let me ask Mr. Scissors a question. Mr. Scissors, how long does one have to have the intent to permanently deprive in order to make it sufficient? Can it be a second?
Yeah, my understanding is that the intent can be brief, but there needs to be a conscious intent.
So if someone said, I'm going to steal this pen, I grab it, and as soon as I get it, my conscience hits me. I was like, you know what? I'm not taking that. I put it down. Bang, bang. I still had the intent to permanently steal this pen, right? And so if I found, as a factual matter, if the finder of fact thought that I did intend to steal this as soon as I grabbed it, that's theft, or at least it's attempted theft, right?
I would say that's likely correct.
Okay. Ms. Burgess, so I know you said a number of times that there doesn't have to be proof that Mr. Hacker actually committed theft, but attempted to theft is sufficient. And you agree with that, Mr. Scissors?
Based on the reading of the statute, yes.
So, but to have attempted theft, the person still has to have the intent to permanently deprive the person of the property, right?
Correct.
It's just they didn't complete it.
Correct.
Or in my hypothetical about the pen, the person just changed their mind and changed their intent, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And
So in this case, Mr. Hacker did give the phone back voluntarily. I mean, no one snatched it out of his hands, right?
I don't agree with that character.
Was there any testimony that someone took it out of his hands and?
Well, he gave it voluntarily to the gym manager when the gym manager said, I don't want to have to revoke your membership after he left the scene and they were asking him to give it back. So voluntarily is a little bit of a stretch.
Fine. But it's not, I mean, there wasn't, okay, understood.
And Your Honor, just regarding the facts and evidence, his specific testimony was that he willingly gave it back. That was the state's witness. And, Your Honor, to this point, State v. Kelly also makes, in one of the notes, it's the defendant's actual return of the property after it is obtained may shed some light on his intent at the time of the alleged taking. So that also should be considered in the court's decision.
May I ask if in State
I
v.
saw that language as well, but that, I mean, that it doesn't mean that it has to mean that. It's something that could be considered.
Of course, just a factor.
And may I ask if in State v. Kelly, again, I haven't read it, I can try to read it quickly while we're sitting here. Did the defendant return it without anyone asking him to?
I think the issue in State v. Kelly was whether, and I just looked at it quickly, but whether making restitution payments was, an intent to make restitution payments reflected an intent to not actually deprive the person, and the Court of Appeals said no, that's not
different.
Paying restitution is different than actually deciding to give something back. And so in that case, the Court of Appeals said it was appropriate to deny the motion for judgment of acquittal. So I just looked at Kelly very quickly, but I think the purpose for which it's cited is about the permanent deprivation, which is, we don't really need a case for it when we have the statute outlining the definition. All right, anything else from either of you?
Nothing from the state, Your Honor.
Nothing from defense.
All right, let's go off I'm going to stay out here. I just want to gather my thoughts for a few minutes, but I will have a ruling for you within a few minutes, so stick around, please.
Would you like the courtroom emptied, Your Honor?
No.
Okay.
Everyone can stay. I mean, it should be less than 5 minutes. I think it'll be faster if I stay here as opposed to going back to the chambers.
Okay, yeah, so, we're definitely rolling along here. Since it's gonna be that quick, I'm just gonna go ahead and leave this up. I am stepping away for a minute, but yeah, I mean, honestly, this could go either way at this point. It depends on how nitpicky the judge wants to be. I think if there is a guilty verdict, I think the sentence should be minimal. But honestly, I think the mens rea is just not between the mental state, the intent behind the action, and the self-defense. I don't think it should be. But anyway, that being said, we'll see what Judge Dahlin has to say.
All right, we're back on the record. I'm ready to make my decision, but first I wanted to make some preliminary comments, and I normally wouldn't make comments like this, certainly not as extensive as I'm going to make in a case like this, but this is an unusual case, and there's obviously political and social issues at play here and interest in the case. And I think it's maybe helpful to have someone from, hopefully an objective perspective to make some comments. And I'm not suggesting that I'm going to change the world with these comments, but I would like to say some things to hopefully get people thinking and maybe limit some problems like this in the future. We oftentimes we hear about the political spectrum as being the far left and the far right. It's like this, but in my take is it's really more of a circle that's closed to the bottom. And at the one side, that people are self-identified, the left are very close to the people on the right at the bottom of the circle in terms of approaches they have and kind of beliefs. And at the very core issues, they differ, but in so many different ways they're alike. And I can certainly see that in this case. And I think it's important in every aspect of life, but especially when people are really diametrically opposed, is to put oneself in the other's shoes and really ask themselves, what would I do if I was in this position that the other person was in? And I was struck when Mr. Hackhurst said that he essentially does the same things that he contends Mr. Ngo does in terms of putting people's information out on the internet, publicly identifying people if he considers that person to be dangerous. And it's really striking that obviously there's some tension between the two of them, but they're effectively doing the same thing. And it just seems that they agree on the tactics, but they differ just on whose information should be out there. And they also disagree about the other person's tactics, even though they're doing the same thing. And speaking of tactics, I appreciate that Mr. Hacker said that it was wrong to pour water on Mr. Ngo, which it was. But I was surprised when Mr. Hacker said that he did not consider that act to be an act of violence, because if I suspect if the roles were reversed and Mr. Ngo dumped water on Mr. Hacker, that Mr. Hacker would have been extremely upset and would have considered it to be a violent act. And so, that's an example of a situation where I think it's important for people to say, what if I was in the other person's shoes? And truly have some empathy and try to figure out what would happen if the roles were switched. And unfortunately, I don't think we do enough of that in our society. And I think we all, myself included, can get wrapped up in our own things and be so focused on what we're doing and thinking we're right that we can't even acknowledge what the other person might be going through, what the other person might be thinking, and how you would act if you were in their situation. And one thing that I've definitely found throughout this job is that we have a lot more in common just as a society than we have differences. I mean, even people who are, like I said, far ends of the political spectrums, if you sat down and actually talked about, well, what do we have in common, you'd find there's a lot more that people have in common. You still have differences, but much more in common than one would think if you actually sat down and talked to the person. So if anyone is interested in actually making positive changes to society, I would ask that you all examine your own methods and ask yourself, are these methods we're using, that I'm using, helpful? Is it actually making a positive impact? Is it actually going to impact the person I'm trying to impact? And then also focus on your own issues and examine your own behavior that might contribute to the conflict, and then figure out if there's a way to do something differently to reach a joint goal that would work for everybody. And if you're really interested in actually trying to change minds, I would suggest that you ask yourself if what you're doing is likely to be effective or not effective. and be honest with yourself about that and just say, is this working or not? If it's not, then say, okay, what do I need to do to make this more effective? And if anyone wants to keep doing something that doesn't have any chance of realistically being effective, then don't kid yourself about what you're doing. Don't sugarcoat things under the guise of thinking, I'm trying to change somebody's minds. I'm trying to win this argument. Just say what you think, but don't expect it to change people's minds. If someone has a particular political belief, a particular historical belief, whatever the beliefs may be, and you feel strongly about it, and you want to broadcast it to someone, that's certainly your right. But don't act as if, don't kid yourself into thinking just by saying it louder and louder and louder that that's going to change any minds. In fact, what it's going to do, if you're just doing it louder and louder, it's actually going to get other people to dig in even deeper. So that's just a general comment. And then if your actions aren't going to change minds on either side, whoever's doing this, it might be actually helpful to ask yourself, why are you doing this? And and ask yourself honestly, and you got to be honest with yourself. And I think we all have a problem being honest with ourselves when we're talking about the things that are deep inside. But ask yourself, are you doing this to antagonize the other side or just needle the other side? And if that is, at least be honest with yourself. Don't kid yourself about that. But understand that when you're trying to antagonize and needle somebody, all that's going to do is make it harder, and it's going to make things worse because the other side is just going to go back to their corner, and there's going to be even a deeper division, and they're frankly going to engage probably in the same kind of conduct because, like I said, people are very similar, and if one side pushes, the other side pushes back, and before you know it, it's just pushing, and it's just a vicious downward cycle. And I mention all this because not only from listening to the testimony and what I've already mentioned about how it sounds like there's some similar approaches here in terms of sides. And to be clear, there are not sides here. Mr. Ngo did not instigate this incident, and he was victimized here. So I'm not, there's not sides here. Mr. Ngo, in terms of what actually happened at 24-Hour Fitness, I think is blameless. But I mention this also because of what happened here in the hallway during one of the breaks, where we have people who are watching a criminal trial about what happens when things get more heated, when someone starts recording somebody, and how that in itself can escalate the arguments even more. And instead of just walking away, which can de-escalate the situation, if someone is arguing, the camera gets pulled out, that makes it even hotter and hotter, and it just makes things worse. And it is kind of astounding that in a situation where we're literally dealing with the situation of things escalating because someone pulls out a phone and starts recording, that the same thing happens in the hallway in the courtroom. So if you really want to create positive change, you need to think about a way to communicate that the other side will be receptive to. But if you think realistically there's no way to change minds, don't engage any further. Don't fan the flames. Just walk away and be mature adults. And I realize that is much easier said than done. I'm not suggesting that's an easy thing to do. But if you think about that ahead of time, especially people that are really politically motivated in it and are going to be engaged in more conflict or high conflict situations, I think it's important to actually think about these things ahead of time to prepare yourself mentally. How are you going to approach this situation, whether it's a particular rally, whether it's writing things, whatever it may be, so you can actually do things that are hopefully are going to create some positive change. But like I said, much, much easier said than done. So, and as I mentioned, Mr. Ngo he should not have had to put up with this. Even if Mr. Hacker has animus towards him, if he doesn't like what he stands for, he doesn't like him as a person, whatever it may be, it's inexcusable for an adult to pour water on another adult. And that may seem minor, but that's not acceptable behavior in society. So I want to make that clear. But the issue in this case is not whether Mr. Hacker did the right thing or did the wrong thing. He clearly did the wrong thing by pouring the water on Mr. Ngo. He clearly did the wrong thing by taking the phone. I can see he's being upset that he's being recorded, but that's not the response. The response would be turn around and walk away. If Mr. Ngo followed him when he was recording, maybe that changes things a little bit. But clearly, Mr. Hacker should not have done what he did. But the issue is not whether Mr. Hacker did the right thing or wrong thing. The issue is whether he had the requisite intent to rise to the level of robbery 3, which requires an intent to commit theft or attempted theft. And in order to do that, one would have to permanently deprive another of property, or keep it long enough so it effectively deprives the person of the property, and they'd have to have the intent to do that. And in this case, I can't say beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Hacker intended to keep Mr. Ngo's phone or to break it so Mr. Ngo could not use it. Rather, it would seem that Mr. Hacker he was frustrated in the moment and lashed out, but at least at a minimum, I can't say beyond a reasonable doubt at the moment that he grabbed the phone that he was intending to keep that from Mr. Ngo forever, that he intended to break it so Mr. Ngo couldn't get the video, he couldn't use the phone. So because of that, I'm finding Mr. Hacker not guilty. And I'm not, to be clear, this is not condoning what Mr. Hacker had to say. It's not condoning what Mr. Hacker had to do. And it's not a finding that Mr. Hacker didn't have this intent. It's simply a finding that I can't say beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a very high standard, that Mr. Hacker had this intent. And I will say, and part of it was, how quickly he returned the property, and maybe he returned the property only because he didn't want to lose his 24-hour fitness membership. Maybe it was just because he just said, "Why don't I even know I have this phone? I just pulled it away, and I'm just going to give it back. I didn't intend to do anything with it." I don't know what the actual intent is, but I can't say beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Hacker did have the intent to permanently deprive Mr. Ngo of the phone, and therefore he's not guilty. And I will sign a judgment to that effect. Anything else for the record, counsel?
Nothing from the defense. Thanks, Your Honor.
Nothing from the state, Your Honor.
All right, we can go off the record.
And there we have it. Yeah, there was definitely a lot of stuff said that I agree with. Those questions that Judge Dahlin suggests that people ask themselves, to one extent or another, I have asked myself those questions pretty regularly when I'm trying to do the work. Trying to make sure that what I give is as truthful and as neutral as I can in relaying the facts. I mean, obviously, anybody seen me online, we know that my opinions come through pretty clearly, but I do hope that, while there are times when I can see justification for more aggressive actions for protecting ourselves and others, but I have seen a lot of interactions escalate, people macing other people for getting too close, bringing paintball guns and shooting them out of trucks as they're driving away into crowds of protesters. I've seen so much of it that it's like, why? What? All it's doing is, ginning up the supporters, the fringe supporters on each side, and alienating everyone from the rest of it. Anyway, yeah, the trial's over. We have our verdict. And it didn't take 3 days like we originally thought it would. So all those messages about trials tomorrow and Thursday, ignore them. And in the meantime, now take care of yourselves. Be safe. Be kind. We're all on this rock together, as much as Elon wants to get us to Mars. Until that happens, we're all in this rock together. Now, I will say, as far as T-Rex, I mean, I completely understand where you're talking about with that. We're in a huge waiting game. In fact, give me a minute here. I'm going to really quick pull up the docket on that. While, yeah, it could be said that this was a waste of the DA's time, it was only, a day or a couple of days, depending on how you want to look at it, that was able to be fit into the court calendar quick. Maybe there was another case that had just had a plea deal and was supposed to go to trial. But, come on. But going through the... Don't like that case. Going through when you're setting up for large trials like a murder trial. In Ben Smith's case, this is a trial that's going to take 3 weeks. And that's not counting. I don't think that's counting setting a jury, because I think they might be doing that outside of the trial dates. But April 17th through May 5th of 2023. Yeah. Murder trials take a long time to prosecute, so it takes a long time to get a large block of time open. We also have all the delays because of COVID, shutting down the courts for, basically a year. But yeah, anyway. That's pretty much all I got right now. Again, like I said before lunch, if you like the kind of stuff we do, feel free to like, subscribe to the channel, share this video. If you want to support, great. If not, if you want to support or encourage others too, I'm definitely on board with that. But I'm more want to make sure that people take care of themselves and each other. And yeah, we will be going forward, figuring out what the next cases we got coming up to watch, and go from there. I've been, with all the questionable stuff going on Twitter, I have been moving from Twitter onto Mastodon instances, and that information I've been getting out in public as I get stuff going with it, and working on a few other projects here as well. So yeah, stay tuned. There'll be more. In the meantime, take care. Have a good day. Have a good week. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, but if you do, don't name it